You're right guys, this is Cobb, and this is going to be the last video of the pet control series. So far we've covered Imp, Succubus and Fellhunter, leaving just the Voidwalker. I won't be covering the Felguard as I know as much about demonology as I do about Prot Warriors, which isn't a great deal, so we're going to start out with a quick rundown of our blue spongy friend. The Voidwalker is a rarely used pet compared to the others, more associated with PvE tanking than anything else. It's a melee damage dealer, dealing a little extra damage with the damage ability Torment. Most of his special abilities are PvE based, such as Suffering, which is a taunt, and Shadow Bulwark, which grants the Voidwalker 30% bonus health for a short time. With most of the Voidy's abilities affecting itself, its main use comes from its ability to disarm melee opponents. Specking into Grimoire of Supremacy will make your Voidwalker pretty much exactly the same in a PvP environment. He just looks a little bit angrier, dealing more damage and having more health. Summoning a second Voidy with Service will have him taunt the target if it is a PvE target and disarm the target. However, the disarm for whatever reason only seems to work around 60% of the time, so it's really strong but not completely reliable. And sacrificing your Voidwalker will grant you his last stand ability, Shadow Bulwark. Now normally I brush over a few macros at this point, but there is only one macro I'd really suggest having for the Voidy. The Shadow Bulwark and Heals macro. This is a very important macro for the Grimoire of Sacrifice Voidwalker spec, and this is because you gain the ability Shadow Bulwark from sacking your Voidy, which increases your maximum health by 30% for a short period. This is such a big deal because Healthstone, Dark Regen and even Ember Tap for Destro all heal you for a percentage of your maximum health, so the more health that you have, the more these abilities will actually heal you. You can see this glyphed Healthstone ticking on me here without Bulwark popped, and comparing it to when I use Bulwark before Healthstoning, you can see the difference is actually pretty massive. To demonstrate the awesome strength behind these heals, my beautiful assistant Decora is going to help me out. But first, notice my spec. I've spec'd into Dark Regen, of course, then I picked Mortal Coil here just for even more self-healing, but any option is viable on this tier really. Next up I spec into Soul Link, and that's because when you sacrifice your pet while spec'd for Soul Link, you gain 20% more max health, and this synergizes perfectly with Shadow Bulwark. You could spec into Unbound Whale next, but I prefer Blood Horror to be even more tanky. Then Sacrifice spec is almost always a must when playing with Voidwalker. We'll cover exactly why in a bit. Now for the effect of all of these talents combined, first I apply Dark Intent. Then I sacrifice my Voidwalker to gain 20% more health. Then finally I pop Shadow Bulwark and my health pool becomes insane. So Decora is going to use all of her best on me now, meaning a full Ascendance, and I'm going to be doing nothing to interrupt here. I do have 4 Embers ready to use, but again I could be porting away here to line of sight, I could be fearing or even using my Mortal Coil just to peel some damage off myself. But for this example, I'm just going to tank it, and I only use Coil right at the end. I could have used it to peel damage, and you can see I finish on a stupid amount of health by the end of this example. Alright, so when should we be using the Voidy and with which Grimoire, which is probably staggeringly obvious at this point. If you're looking to use the Voidwalker in Battlegrounds, you pretty much only want to be using Grimoire of Sacrifice. Both a regular Voidy and the Supremacy Voidy are only useful for their disarm ability, and this won't actually help you against a lot of opponents such as casters and healers. However, by specking into Sacrifice, you actually get to use the disarm and then sacrifice your Voidy to use his Shadow Bulwark and become an insane tank. You can see here again, I'm just tanking an insane amount of damage. I mean, defensively, this spec really is immense. But one big problem I have with the spec is its lack of control in teamfights. Not having a spell lock or a pet seduction doesn't feel so great to me personally, just because while you can live for a hell of a long time, people can and will freecast into you in most encounters. So if you're intent on using the Voidy as a main pet in Battlegrounds, you're probably best off just sacrificing it. However, how I like to use the Voidwalker is with Grimoire of Service. I like to use a Succubus as my main pet and then summon a Service Voidie to disarm any melees I might come across. It doesn't say in the spell tooltip at the moment that the Voidie will do this disarm, which is possibly why it can be a bit unreliable, but it's epic when it works out, which is most of the time. Okay, now for arenas in which you will barely ever see a Voidwalker getting used, but it can be useful in some isolated scenarios. Again, both Supremacy and Service Grimoires are all but useless when compared to what you can do with the Sacrifice Grimoire. Against this 2v2 team, I'm able to disarm the Retri Paladin on his cooldowns before sacrificing my pet. Then when it comes down to 2v1 further on in the game, I get a double mortal coil to kill off this Paladin. Now it looks like I'm going to die, but to this Hunter's extreme dismay, I'm about to basically become indestructible for 20 seconds. Thanks to these mongoloided heals, I'm able to wear the Hunter down, which considering I'm an under-geared Warlock and it's a BM Hunter, that's pretty nice. The issue with this is that it's only really good in 2v2s, because in 3v3, you're always either going to need a Fel Hunter or an Imp for its dispels. It's also only really good against double melee DPS teams where a spell lock would be otherwise useless. So in conclusion, if you really want to use a Voidie in Battlegrounds, I'd advise running with Sacrifice spec and making use of not only the disarm, but the massive survivability boost with Shadow Bulwark and your heals. However, I probably wouldn't advise the old Voidie as your main pet for Battlegrounds. I prefer to use something like a Succubus and summon a mini Voidie with the Service Grimoire when I need the disarm. In arenas, the only time I would use a Voidwalker as my main pet with the Sacrifice Grimoire is when facing double melee DPS in 2v2s. In any other situation, the other pets tend to be far more useful. Alright guys, this will likely be the last of the pet control guides. I won't be covering Demonology's Felguard pet as I've mentioned before. It's much more rarely played and I personally never play, so just like Affliction, I feel way too underqualified to be giving even basic advice on it. But that aside, I really hope that you found at least some of the tips or any of the guidelines that I covered in this series useful. You can find all of the videos compiled into one single playlist on my channel page if there's any that you've missed. Thanks for watching everyone, thanks for following the channel, and I will see you all next time.